Hello everyone, welcome to my channel about writing stuff. My name's Camille and today we are talking about mystery as a subgenre or subplot in your fantasy story. The thing about the fantasy genre and the thing that I've been thinking about is when you go to the fantasy section, the only thing that is implied about all of the stories in the fantasy section is that the world and setting will have fantastical elements and that the fantastical elements will infer things and traits upon the characters. When you go into the fantasy section, there really is nothing implied about the plot, as opposed to if you go into the mystery section or the thriller section or the horror section, you have an idea of what the plot will entail. For a mystery, it's questions and clues and whodunit and red herrings. You go into the horror section and it's monster, who, what is it, how do we defeat it, how do we survive, kind of a thing. And fantasy doesn't really have this. You know, whether it's urban fantasy, epic fantasy, contemporary fantasy, portal fantasy, there is no implication of plot. And as a fantasy writer, I've always struggled with this idea of plot because when people talk about writing fantasy, it's rare that these other genres are pulled in. It's rare that, mystery and thriller and suspense and romance, well, romance is talked about it a little bit, but it's rare that these other genres are discussed and taught within this area of discussing fantasy. So I'm starting a series where I'm talking about these other genres as subplots in your fantasy story. It's one thing to have a character in an interesting setting, but that isn't really a story. So today we're talking about mystery in fantasy and how it can be used as a plot device. So the first thing I want to talk about with mystery, I'm pretty sure all of you understand what a mystery is. We've all watched mysteries or read mysteries or have enjoyed stories where mystery is a part of it, but I'm not going to talk about the over umbrella of mystery. I'm going to talk about mystery in fantasy. So the first way we use this idea of mystery where there's someone who did something, maybe there's a murder, maybe someone is kidnapped, maybe people are getting sick and we don't know why. The first tool to use when plotting a mystery is this concept of every scene should be doing multiple things. And this is very powerful in fantasy because if you have a scene that's doing multiple things, you can introduce things about the character. You can introduce interesting, intriguing elements of your fantasy world while also giving clues about the mystery, while also introducing, something going wrong. And it's a very clever way to bury the truth of what's happening. If you have a scene where a character is learning magic or sort of talking about, the politics of the world or whatever, if you make those things interesting enough, then any clues you introduce in that scene will essentially be buried because your reader will be focused on the interesting aspects going on. The second thing I want to talk about is our questions and answers. So the thing about a mystery is it's not just a question. It's not just, why is this way? It's multiple questions. And as your character goes along the way, they need to find some answers. And when they find answers, it should lead to more questions, or the answer should open more doors for who could have done this. And then that brings us into this idea of red herrings. So I'm totally going to use Harry Potter while talking about this idea of mystery because all the Harry Potter books are essentially mysteries. But, in Sorcerer's Stone, we have all of the clues that Professor Quirrell is the bad guy, is the whodunit bad guy, the guy who's trying to get the Sorcerer's Stone. But all the while, Professor Snape is a very convincing red herring. And that is because J.K. Rowling does a very good job of having Quirrell and Snape in the same scene, having them both be the possible bad guy, but focusing on Snape, and then having the characters focus on Snape and having Snape be the sort of eerie presence that is more convincing than Professor Quirrell. And that's really important when writing a mystery, is you don't just want to scatter the clues into these scenes doing multiple things and try to bury them, because the reader will pick up on that. When you introduce a clue, that clue needs to infer that it could be multiple people sort of doing this bad thing, or it could be your clue should lead in multiple directions, basically, is what I'm getting at. And lastly, I want to talk about this idea of reactive versus proactive in your protagonist. So in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, we have characters that are being petrified. And it is this huge mystery because no one knows what is petrifying these people at first. The trio has to learn what the Chamber of Secrets is. They need to learn who has the ability to open the Chamber of Secrets. But more than that, from the very beginning, Harry and the trio in general are basically seen as the people who done it, right? It's, they're at the scene of every crime. Harry can hear the monster speaking because it's a snake, yada, yada, yada. And the first half of the book, the trio are reactive. It's people are getting petrified, the trio show up, and then they're trying to catch up to what the monster is doing. And that's a powerful opening because it makes the characters vulnerable, it poses a lot of questions, and as a reader, you really fear for the characters. But once you get to the midway point of Chamber of Secrets, where Hermione gets petrified, and then finally Harry and Ron turn around and say, okay, we need to get ahead of the monster. And that's when we go from a reactive protagonist to a proactive protagonist. So Harry and Ron go to Hagrid, they try and get some information, and then they go into danger by following the spiders and trying to get information. And that's a really powerful thing. That is a great way to keep up pacing, especially in a mystery, is you don't want these characters to be just reactive throughout the entire book. Scratch that. That's not just mystery. That's all stories, whether it's adventure or suspense or thriller, or horror. You have a character that's reactive up until the midpoint. Something happens at the midpoint. Something really awful. In this case, it's Hermione getting petrified. And that motivates your characters to try and get ahead of the bad guy. And in doing that, Harry and Ron end up getting the clues that they need and the information that they need to really deduce what's happening. But it's not until the very end that we learn Ginny was Lord Voldemort's pawn in this mystery. So the thing about mystery and fantasy is that you can take all of the elements of a classic mystery and on top of that, pile on other questions and curiosities that can sort of hide the clues or hide your foreshadowing. And it also introduces red herrings that aren't just people. In this case, it's not just Tom Riddle and using Ginny who are the bad guys. It is also the basilisk in this hidden chamber, which also brings in history of the world because the Chamber of Secrets was created by Salazar Slytherin during the founding of Hogwarts. And it really brings a fullness to your fantasy story when your mystery plot, because literally the whole plot of the story is just this mystery, but the mystery plot brings in world, setting, magic, history of the school, history of other people, lies and deceit, the magic of the journal, and all of these, it's a big machine, all of these moving parts. It's Lucius Malfoy putting the journal in Ginny's Cauldron, Ginny taking it to Hogwarts and essentially being used like a pawn, and then all these other things. And then you have Hagrid, and then his love of monsters, and then the spider, but then you also have like the car, magic flying car. Anyway, that's a powerful way to use mystery, is you can use your mystery plot to draw in all of these other elements of world and characterization. Like I said, plot is not my strong suit. It's the one thing that I'm constantly working on. So I'm going to keep digging into this. If I think of any other things about mystery, I'll definitely do another video on it. And then next week, I'll talk about maybe romance as a subgenre or thrillers. We'll see. But for now, as always, you should be writing stuff.